Welcome. Thank you so much for taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us. My name is Megan Finnerty. I'm the founder and director of the Storytellers Project, and it is my joy to welcome you to USA Today's Storytellers Project show right now. Tonight, we're going to tell stories about being a kid, having kids, remembering moments from childhood. And we are joining Humana and the Arizona Lottery as our local market sponsor, and 5 Americans from across the nation to create community with you. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has put on more than 100 shows a year in communities across the country. But we've canceled all of our in-person shows, to be honest, as part of the USA Today Network's response to the novel coronavirus. And so even though it feels like kind of unsafe to be together in theaters, it feels super necessary to be together online. So we have handpicked 5 of our very best stories from more than 1,000 of the ones told over the last several years. Tonight, we're here to talk, and it's going to be charming and funny and relatable and touching, but most of all, it is going to be entertaining. I promise. So I first want you to meet our storytellers. Are you ready? Please say hi to Marella Osebo from California,
Hi.
Kathy Nakagawa from Arizona, Evan Roberts, also from Arizona, and our colleague at the Storytellers Project. Amy Carney is coming to us from California, and Sarah Frazier is here from Tennessee. Hi, Sarah. Sarah is also our colleague. She works on the Storytellers Project as one of our members in Tennessee, so we're really excited to have her. You're going to hear from her later in the show. Thanks, everyone. So here's what tonight is not. Tonight is not a TED Talk. It's not Toastmasters. It's not a how-to. It's not an inspirational speech. Instead, what tonight really is a visit. I know it's a little bit weird to have a visit that only goes in one direction, but bear with me. Tonight, we want you to open your heart and receive these stories because that's how community connecting really happens. The idea is that you're curious about these others and you want to learn from their lived experiences. So you open your heart. Like I said, you kind of like make yourself available to learning the lessons or at least feeling like a little closer to them emotionally. We're really excited about that because that's really why we exist as a storytelling organization. Instead, or one of the things I want you also to know is some of these stories are going to be polished and professional and super smooth. Others are going to be more casual and conversational, like I am now. We ask you to receive all of them as they're told in the spirit in which they're intended, because we coach how the stories are organized, but we don't like coach people on how to be themselves. We know the way they tell the story is part of the expression of the point of the story. So I'm really excited to welcome our very first storyteller. Marella is coming to us from California, and she has a story about how a small friendship turned into a big deal.
So thank you.
Sorry.
The year was 1983, and I was a 10-year-old latchkey kid new to the San Fernando Valley living with a single mom. And this was my first day of school. I remember waking up and being super excited. I got dressed. It was my Sunday best. It was a red and white polka dot dress. I had a ribbon around my waist, these knee-high socks. They were white, black patent leather shoes. I mean, in my little mind, I was playground ready. I grabbed my Charlie's Angels lunchbox and I just walked myself to school looking forward to a great day. So I get to campus and I realize there is no kid in sight. I was actually late on my first day of school. So I remember just running down the hallways. I just was sort of freaking out. I opened the door to Mrs. Holmes's classroom and then I panicked. When all heads turned to look at me and all eyeballs were looking at me, I just froze and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to break the silence until one kid, precious Dino, he turned to me and he pointed and he said, "Tardy." Well, that was one way to break the silence. I just slid down into the one chair that was empty, which happened to be the chair right next to the door I had just opened. So it was pretty clear from the beginning that things weren't going well where I was sitting. My classmate and I were clashing, and so my teacher decided to move me next to a different classmate. And her name was Matha, or at least that's what I called her because I was having a hard time pronouncing her true name, which is Mata. So Matha was and is Persian, and she was the social butterfly of the classroom. We could talk about anything. There was just an ease when we were together. She would make me laugh, and for a shy kid like me, it just was very welcoming to have that kind of easy friendship. So Mata and I are very alike in some ways and very different in other ways. She has these really big green eyes, beautiful. She has fuzzy brown hair and these tiny little wrists, which to this day she blames for not being able to do a push-up, which cracks me up. But aside from that, the things that we do have in common is that we're both from immigrant families. So her family is from Iran, my family is from Mexico. We're both former ESL students, so English is our second language. We grew up with very little, just nothing fancy. We shopped at swap meets. Our parents worked at very low-paying jobs, and that's just the way that we grew up. So Mata was so kind. I remember there were days that she would share her lunch with me even, and she would always preface by saying, so I brought you this special kind of bologna with this special kind of bread, which I knew was code for, I got this from the Persian market where my mom shops. So fast forward to now us being adults. 4 years ago, it's our birthdays, and we decided that we wanted to do something because we have this tradition where we say no to gifts, but yes to trips. So it was her idea to take a road trip, and we had never taken a road trip. So I was open to the idea. Well, what were you thinking, kind of thing. And she says, why don't we take a drive, go back to our hometown, back to our roots. I mean, that's what we'll call it. We're going to go on an adventure, and we'll just revisit all our favorite places. We'll keep it very low key, simple, and we're just going to reminisce. And I loved this idea. So the two of us were excited. We pack up her black Honda Civic. We had an overnight bag, and we decided that we were going to bring boxes of old photographs. So pictures that we had taken since we were 10 years old. And we had lots of them because growing up, we loved to take pictures. And that was with the old fashioned cameras and the rolls. And so we have packages of them. So we're ready. We're set to go on this adventure, back to our roots. So we gas up, we go to the gas station, we buckle in, crank up the country music. And then 30 minutes later, we're there. Beautiful downtown Burbank. It's home of NBC Studios and Universal Studios. That's where we grew up. It was exactly 35 miles away from where we live now, 5 cities over, and there we were in Burbank. So I remember being in our hotel room, and we were sitting on the floor and going through boxes of pictures, reminiscing about old times. And we were like an old married couple, like filling each other in and reminding each other of the stories. And some things we had forgotten, some details were really crystal clear. And we're looking through these pictures, and all I can think is, wow, look at us. We look so young, we look so innocent, and we look really 80s with the big hair and the perms. So as we're going through these pictures, we come across the picture, the very first picture of us ever. And I'm pretty sure it's a photograph that Mrs. Holmes had taken of us. So we're at school, we're in the sandbox, and we're sitting inside one of these huge spider structures. So when we see that picture, we both agree, this has to be our first stop. So we drive ourselves over to Miller Elementary School. And as soon as we step foot on campus, it was like we regressed to young girls again, like 10 years old. We were skipping down the halls and running on the playground. And we even stepped foot on this old auditorium, stepped foot on the stage in this old auditorium. And we reminisced of how we sang for the 6th grade talent show. We sang a cappella to Shirley Temple's Old Ship Lollipop. And I have to say, we had no business singing then. We had no business singing now, but we didn't care. It was just fun to be back. Everything just seemed so small on this campus. And sadly, that sandbox and that spider structure was no longer there, but we still were able to take a picture, and we could remember, what it was like to be on campus. So then from there, we went to a local park. And this park, it was a place that we spent so much time when we were young, before we could drive, because it was walking distance. And this park has this beautiful library, a library with these huge wooden doors and beautiful just structure and archways and windowsills and and plants and flowers. And yes, we had pictures of when we were young in front of all these places. And so part of this trip of going back to our roots, we had decided was to recreate these photographs. As we came across these photographs, we said, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go back to these exact locations, and we are going to pose in the exact same way, and we're going to have the exact same expressions. So that's really what this trip became, is a place, is a time for us to just go back to these memorable places that we had photographed ourselves in. And so then from the park, we went back to her house. And we wanted to take a picture on her front porch, because this was a place, again, before we could drive, we spent so much time sitting on her porch. Remember her having this outdoor lawn, this couch, and we would sit there and we would talk for hours and laugh at nonsense. And we would talk about things like who was going to get the first perm, or who was going to take ice skating lessons first, because neither one of us could afford them. But we talked about that, and we would talk about, okay, well, you're going to marry the next driver in the next red car that passes by, because those are the types of games that we played back then. So we reminisced about that, and we wanted to take a picture, and her mom was there, so we asked her to do that. And at that time, sadly, she was suffering from Parkinson's disease, so her hands were very shaky, and she was very self-conscious about taking our picture, and she didn't want to, and we insisted. And in the end, she took our photograph, and it was perfect. It was beautiful. So then from there, we went to our favorite place to eat back then, which was Carl's Jr. Now, I said before, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. We didn't eat out a whole lot because we just didn't have the money, but occasionally we would pool our money together, and we would go out and we would share one famous store with cheese, an order of fries, and a Coke. And I have a photograph of us way back then. We were probably teenagers. And the picture has us sitting in the booth eating our burger with a tabletop number of 24. So it seemed fitting that when we went back, that we insist that we have the number 24. And sure enough, the cashier was kind enough to go through the whole stack of numbers, gave us number 24. We recreated that picture. And then our last stop was our community college, where we went to school, Glendale Community College. Now, there was a time where Mata and I both wanted to be private investigators. We were both majoring in criminal justice. We were taking some classes together, and we were both working for campus police. So yes, we have pictures of us back then in our uniforms. And so we wanted to go back and take photographs of us now in front of the patrol car. And we got pictures of the officers that were there on duty. So having said all of that, you know, I think of just a friendship in general. Like, what is the secret to the longevity of a friendship like ours? And I would say, you know, with Mata and I, she's my friend. So when something good happens, I don't compete with her. I celebrate her successes. I'm her biggest cheerleader, as she is for me. You know, when I buy a lipstick that looks good on me, I'm happy to share it because I know it's going to look good on her. And so when she offered us this opportunity, this trip to go back to our roots, I said yes. And that was one of the most memorable trips that we have had together.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Marella. First of all, also, hi to Martha. I hope she's watching.
Oh, she is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your story. I think it is such a blessing to hear about lifelong friendships, because we all know as grown-ups that, you know, friendship is the kind of thing like you have to keep investing in. Mm-hmm. And it's such a joy to hear about two women who kept choosing each other in all the ways that you changed and grew. You kept choosing to come back to one another, and it fills my heart with hope.
Oh,
it does.
I'm glad.
Awesome. Marella, thank you so much for your story and for sharing it with us. Awesome. Well, I hope that story fills your heart with hope. And if it makes you think of a person you love or a person that's been so important to you, but maybe you haven't talked to him for a minute, the pandemic is a good time to pick up the phone. Maybe you got a minute these days. I know I'm spending more time on the phone than I normally am. So thank you so much, Marella, for modeling that positive behavior. I'd like to take just a second right now to thank our corporate sponsors. You guys can see in the bottom right-hand corner, it says, brought to you by Humana. And that is because Humana has stuck with us through the coronavirus pandemic. As I mentioned, we had to cancel all of our in-person shows, but they believe in our project so much that they said, hey, we'll come to the internet with you. We'll hang out with you virtually, because they believe sharing stories makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And they know that we need these connections right now to each other and to health more than ever right this minute. So as the coronavirus pandemic, as we all know, continues to change day by day, Humana says that they remain committed to health, safety, and the well-being of the people and the communities it serves. We definitely are seeing that, they're maintaining their commitment to us in this project, and everyday Americans sharing their stories. If you want to know more about all the ways that they're supporting mental health and fighting social isolation, as well as specific coronavirus sort of safety tips around coronavirus, you can go to humana.com to learn more about what they're doing every day to connect you to better health personally and within your community. So that's a big thank you from us to Humana for helping create this moment. It's now my joy to bring up Kathy Nakagawa. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that Kathy is an educator at Arizona State University, but she's also a storytelling leader. She runs her own storytelling event called it's a slice and a story?
Slice, stories and cake.
And I want you to hear that, yes, what Kathy just said, Kathy runs a storytelling collective where you literally get dessert and you hear people tell stories. It is an enormous blessing to our community here in Phoenix, and I wanted to publicly appreciate her right now. Kathy, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have to acknowledge my co-producer on the slice, who is Marella Osebo. So there are a couple of things that are surprising to people upon meeting me. One is that I'm shorter than I look. Another is that I'm a native Arizonan. I don't necessarily fit the picture of what a Arizonan might be, but my grandparents immigrated from Japan over 100 years ago, and my dad's side of the family settled in Arizona. They've been here for over 80 years. And so I was actually born right here in Phoenix, Arizona, about a mile away from where I now live at St. Joseph's Hospital. Something else that surprises people is that there used to be hundreds of acres of flowers in the desert at the foot of South Mountain, which is located maybe 10-minute drive from downtown Phoenix. And my family was one of the families that helped to grow those flowers and farm down on Baseline Road. So a number of Japanese American families after World War II, after they were released from the US incarceration camps, ended up farming along Baseline Road. And at first they grew vegetables. They grew cucumbers and tomatoes and squash and flowering kale and things. But then later, one of the families, the Kishiyama families, learned that the area was really good for growing flowers. It was like a microclimate. And so they told all the other families along Baseline Road to grow flowers too. And eventually it grew to the point where there were over 300 acres of flowers growing from 48th Street to 32nd Street on both sides of Baseline Road. Today, if you went to Baseline, it's a 6-lane highway with cars zipping by at 50 miles an hour. But then it was a 2-lane highway. And when the flowers were in bloom, it was an incredible sight. It was a tourist attraction written up in magazines and featured in Phoenix tourist brochures. So on the weekends, when I was a kid, I remember the cars would be driving so slowly along Baseline Road. They would be bumper to bumper. And on Sundays, you would see whole families in their station wagons, and they'd pull over and they'd climb out of their station wagons, still dressed for church. And they would walk in the fields and take pictures. And then they'd go over to the stands, the sheds where the Japanese American families were selling the vegetables and flowers that they grew. So most of the families had these tin-sided metal sheds that had these garage door type openings and planks for shelving. And they sold their flowers and their vegetables there. And they had a big walk-in cooler nearby that they could store everything in. And growing up as a kid, my brother Mark and my sister Naomi and I liked going down there. We'd run around, we'd get to run through the fields. My dad built this little bridge over the canal so we wouldn't risk trying to jump over. And we could walk over the canal, run through the fields about a half mile to my grandma's house, who lived on the other side of the fields. We'd visit her, she'd make us a Spam sandwich, and then we'd come back to the flower shop. And as a family business, we learned a little bit about it. We learned how to stock the tomatoes in a box in just a particular way so that they were all topside down and they looked especially delicious to eat. I loved watching a machine that my dad built that had all the cucumbers tumble through it, and it would squirt a little bit of oil on each one to dust it off and then to shine it up before it was boxed up to be sold. I learned how to make corsages, not particularly well, but I can make one if needed, and I could wire a rose so that the head didn't wilt down. My mom wasn't a farmer, but she was really good at customer relations, and so she helped out in the front of the shop a lot. And she would wait on the customers. She would maybe stick in an extra bouquet or an extra stem into a bouquet, or take a little discount just to give people a little bump that they could, surprise that they could have. She taught us how to answer the phone in a particular way. Good afternoon, Baseline Flowers, how may I help you? And we had to, whenever we would ring up a customer, we had to calculate change in our head and then count it back in a certain way to double check our arithmetic. My little sister Naomi and I would often take naps there in these cupboards that my dad built, and they had these little holes so we could peek through and see what was going on in the shop while we were napping. My dad was especially entrepreneurial, and so he would decide that he wanted to build onto his flower shop. So when I was about 5 years old, he ended up doing this big construction project. He closed in one part of the shop with glass walls, and so that it could be air conditioned, while the other side was just with a swamp cooler and evaporative cooler. He built a 3-story pagoda tower so that tourists could climb up to the top and see all those acres of flowers. They were these beautiful colors. It was stalks and calendulas and sweet peas in colors of purple and lavender and sunny orange and cotton candy pink. And the smell could be smelled for miles around. People could smell it everywhere around the area. So on the weekends, again, tourists would be lined up out the door waiting to go up to the top of the tower. But on the weekdays when no one was around, we got to play in that tower. Up and down those stairs, we would race, and we would go up to the top and have our own private picnics. I watched how hard my parents worked to build the business, and they never complained. But they would live their lives by these Japanese sayings or proverbs. One was shikata ganai, and shikata ganai means it can't be helped. It's a saying that happens when you face something that's challenging and you've just got to not dwell on it. You have to move on. So they would say shikata ganai, let's keep going. Another one was gambatte, which gambatte, stick with it, persevere, do your best. So they would say that to us when we maybe would want to complain or give up a little bit. My mom was also very fond of this other saying, saru mo ki kara uchiru, which literally means even a monkey falls from a tree. And she would use it, for instance, when I came home from school one time and I had gotten 100 on a test, and there was only one other kid who had gotten 100 on that math test, and I wanted to be proud of that and show my mom. And she would say, ki kara uchiru mo, or ki kara saru mo uchiru. And I would say, okay, because she would say, you can't brag, you're going to get a big head, don't be overconfident. Even a monkey falls from a tree. And it wasn't until years later that I learned that 99% of Japanese people usually use that in a situation to say, everyone makes mistakes, but not my mom. She wanted to make sure we stayed humble. So I grew up and I went to college and grad school, and I had my first job in California. And I was living there when I got a call from my mom one morning, and she didn't usually call me in the morning. So I was worried, and she said, the shop caught fire. So she said it was really bad. The plume of smoke could be seen for miles, so much so that the news sent a helicopter over to capture everything. So I was married by that point in time, and my husband Tim and I came to Arizona to see what we could do to help. And it was pretty devastating. The part of the shop, the original part with the metal siding, had been completely destroyed. And the other part of the shop had a lot of smoke and water damage. And the tower itself was completely gone. It had completely gone up in the flames. So we tried to help clean up. We tried to pick out things that could be saved, vases or little ceramic containers that were shaped like teddy bears. But what was hardest was that it turned out my parents were underinsured. And so it wasn't even clear to what extent they could rebuild or reopen. And my brother and sister and I were there, but we never openly talked about whether they should rebuild or not. And I think all of us were thinking maybe they shouldn't. They were pretty old at that point. Maybe it was time to retire. So I left after a week. We went back to California, and a little while later, my dad called. And my dad rarely called me, but he called and he said, "Your mom decided we're going to rebuild." So that was it. They decided to rebuild the shop. They were living by those proverbs. Shikata ganai, it can't be helped. We're just going to keep going. Gambatte. So they did. They rebuilt with friends' help and neighbors' help and bartering, which my dad was very good at. They were able to reopen the next spring, and they had a big party to thank everyone for that. So the flower fields are now gone. There's a housing complex there, housing development, and my dad just turned 97 last week, and his flower shop is the only one left down on Baseline Road. My mom passed away a number of years ago, but I'm really glad that I ended up moving back to Arizona when I started my family. And I'm happy that my daughters can see the place where I got to grow up. They've helped out at the flower shop a little bit. They know how to answer the phone. They don't know how to make corsages, but they can help with wiring a rose if needed. My dad sits at the desk that's charred by that fire, and there's still my mom's handwriting on some of the boxes that store things. And the cupboards where my sister and I napped are still there, but they hold supplies. Because my dad's so old, he sometimes complains now. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't see, I can't hear, I can't walk, my knees hurt." But he still goes down to the flower shop 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And he's living that lesson that he taught me so long ago that my parents taught. Gambatte. Persevere, do your best. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you so much for your story. It's such a blessing to get to meet your mom and dad in your story. Do you think could you tell us like their full names so we can know them?
Oh yeah, so my dad's name is Nick Nakagawa, and my mom's name was Tatsuko Nakagawa.
Awesome. Hi. I mean, is your dad watching? Is he tuning in to see you right now?
I didn't tell him. I'll show him later.
Ladies and gentlemen, no matter how long you've been out of the house, people don't tell their parents things. Kathy, thank you so much for your story. And thank you for introducing us to your mom and dad. Like, what an example of community-oriented generosity.
Thanks.
Awesome, thanks. We would like to, speaking of Arizona, we would like to acknowledge one of our sponsors, the Arizona Lottery. The Lottery sponsors the Storytellers Project down in Tucson, and they've been a sponsor of the Storytellers Project in Phoenix. And the whole idea is that they do a lot more than provide fun games for you to play and tickets to scratch off. Here in Arizona, they drive revenue, or money that's not won. So leftover money, sorry. They drive money to more than 18 organizations, nonprofits across the state that make Arizona more livable and more awesome. These are vital programs that serve our state's most vulnerable populations. And they believe that storytelling is an incredible way to feel closer to your neighbors and to learn more about our state and others. So we really appreciate them supporting the Arizona Storytellers Project and the Tucson Storytellers Project and funneling that sponsorship into our online event. It really means a lot because the money they give us helps to support our journalists that provide coverage of our state's two largest cities. So, Arizona Lottery, thanks so much for showing up for us in real life and certainly online. And thank you so much for supporting the myriad of organizations that funnel money into education, healthcare, wildlife and recreational management, and homelessness populations. That money goes really far in our state. So we appreciate the work you do, and we appreciate you supporting Storytellers. It is my joy right now to introduce Evan Roberts. You guys know Evan because he's a member of the Storytellers Project team. He works with us at USA Today, and he's in charge of all of our marketing, our social media, tons of stuff. If you like our new social media look, follow us on social. If you don't now, Evan was in charge of rolling it out. So thank you so much. Thanks, Evan. I am excited to hear your story.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. So I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in a neighborhood called Orange Mound, which is designated as the first African-American neighborhood in the United States, built by African Americans for African Americans. That was around the late 1800s. And by the time, it was a nice place to be at the time, but by the time I arrived in the late 80s, it was, not so nice. But my street was still very nice. There were a lot of older people on my street, a lot of young families. My parents had 5 kids. I'm the middle child. And so that was most of the street right there. But yeah, we had a lot of friends that were around in the neighborhood to play with. And we'd always play things, like cops and robbers, or Power Rangers, or, the X-Men, or what have you. Just all kinds of, toy weapons, toy guns. I remember I had a slingshot, like Dennis the Menace, that I got really good at hitting stop signs with. And my dad had been a Boy Scout when he was a kid, and he taught us how to make our own bow and arrow, and how to make the wood pliable by soaking it in the tub overnight, so that when you cut a T notch in the top, and tie a string around, you can make the arrow, really fly, and make the bow itself pliable. So all kinds of things like that. And, there were just always kind of toy weapons around, water guns, Nerf guns, that kind of thing was not out of the ordinary. But then there were other things. I remember when I was 8 or 9, I found a rusted machete behind my aunt's house, and it was in a bush. I took it out and cleaned it up a little bit, and I asked my parents if I could keep it, and they said yes. So that was a great toy. It was fun to like hack, bushes and, tree limbs and things like that. I was probably a monster. But I also played a lot with Legos, of course, with my siblings, with them, and then also by myself. So when we moved from Memphis to Cleveland Heights, I was just really sad at the time. I didn't like Cleveland at first. I love it now, having grown up there. But at the time, I was just really lonely. I wanted my friends from Memphis. I wanted my family. And I think the increase in my Lego collection from my parents at that time was maybe their way of easing some of my angst, whether that was conscious or unconscious, I'm not sure. But I also remember one time when I was a kid in Memphis where, we had, as most houses might, small rodents, rats, mice, that kind of thing. And my dad rented a 9mm pellet gun to take care of it. And he kept it in a locked box in the trunk. And one day he was letting my older brother and myself and my younger brother just see it, hold it, get a feel for it. And I guess my mom came out. She came out and saw it, and she was like, "Nope." So he had to take it back. I didn't really think anything of it at the time. I just thought, she didn't like guns. But so yeah, we're in Cleveland, and when I was in the 5th grade, I was walking home from school one day, going home to play with my Legos, and I got it in my head somehow that it would be fun to make a toy gun out of Legos. I thought that would be cool. I thought it would look like that 9mm that I had seen, and I wanted to get as close as possible, with the pieces that I had. So the first thing I did was I dumped all my Legos out into the floor, all over the carpet, and began separating, all of the red and green and yellow and blue pieces away from all of the black pieces, because I knew I wanted to be matte black. And then I started stacking large Legos up and tried to get, the grip of it right about the length of my hand. And after that, I got the right length. I, took it apart and started replacing those sections with different size Legos, some with rounded edges, so that the grip felt better in my hand. Next, I did the action so that, I could have it so that it looked like, you know, a real hammer, a real gun's hammer. And then I did the nozzle with a little orange piece for the sight at the top, and also so you could tell it was a toy. You know, cap guns, all kinds of things like that have like a little orange cap on them that you can tell is, so you can tell it's not a real gun. And then I did the trigger, and I went through maybe 4 or 5 or 20 iterations of a trigger, finally landing on this hinge piece that was probably originally for some space or airplane wing or something like that. But it worked really well because it could go like in and out like that, like a real gun trigger. And so by the time I was finished, I maybe spent like 2 or 3 hours on this thing. And I was so excited. I found my older brother and I brought it to him. I was like, yo, look what I got. And he kind of jumps a little bit. And he said, where did you get that? I was like, I made it. It's Legos. Look, it's cool, right? He was like, yeah, that's awesome. And I was like, should I keep the little orange piece on it? And he looked at me and I looked at him. And we were both like, nah. So I took it off. And I kept my little toy Lego gun for about 2 weeks, I would say. Just taking it around, playing with it. And, you know, I would sleep with it under my pillow. And we moved into a duplex in Cleveland. My house was on the 2nd floor. And there was a window that went out onto the roof that overhung the front porch, and it was shaded by 2 large buckeye trees. And so I would lay down and pretend to shoot the tires out of the cars passing by. One day I was playing with it outside, and my younger brother was playing with me. And I remember right as I was going to take it out and point it at him, my mom came home from work. And she pulled in and stopped immediately in the front, kind of haphazard, not like she normally did. She normally parked in the back where the garage was. But she kind of whips in and jumps out the car and says, boy, get in the house. And I knew she was talking to me. So I walked up the porch, went inside, and sat on the couch. Like I said, I'm from the South, so when your mama tells you to do something, you do it. And she comes in and puts her bag down, and she says, where did you get that? What do you have? And I said, hold it in front. I was like, Mom, it's Legos. It's a toy. I made it. And I took the hilt piece off of the top and put it back together so she could see it was just a toy. And she kind of does this sigh of relief. And she looks at me and she says, I want you to take it apart piece by piece, and I don't ever want to see it again. Don't you ever build that again. Do you understand me? And I say, yes, ma'am. And at the time, I thought her reaction was a little much, a little overblown. But I get it now. I just thought she didn't like guns.
Evan, thank you so much for your story. I know that it's like a subtle story, and it's a really serious story that kind of like starts funny and cute, right? And then you sort of sneak up on us with a big idea at the end.
I'm nothing if not sneaky.
No, stop. Did your mom know you were telling tonight? Is she watching?
She actually called me right before this, and I had my phone on Do Not Disturb, so I didn't answer. But I don't know if she saw me post on Facebook, then she knows.
Okay. Hi, Mrs. Roberts.
She's heard it before.
I know. Well, thank you so much for telling us your story. I know so many of us can relate, especially about like, oh, you know, things that seem like a good idea when you're a kid, and then things that you come to understand so differently when you become an adult.
For sure.
Thanks, Evan. Our next storyteller is named Amy Carney, and she is coming to us from California with a story that is really one that shows such incredible vulnerability and strength. We're so thankful. This is the third time she's sharing her story on our stages, because as part of our virtual season, we are drawing on some of our best storytellers from across the network. We want to bring you our most polished and professional tellers. I do want to take just a second before I bring Amy up to acknowledge our coaches from across the network who've helped to develop these stories, because they were found first and coached and sort of brought to stages across America by our peers. So I want to take a second to say thank you so much to our colleagues at the at the Arizona Republic, at the Ventura County Star. And Sarah Frazier is here on behalf of our sister paper in Knoxville, which was getting ready to launch the Storytellers project when coronavirus kind of derailed their plans. So Sarah, thanks for being part of the project. We'll hear from you in a minute. But those are our brothers and sister papers across the network. If you want to support our journalism and storytelling events like this, please subscribe to those papers if you live in any of our communities. So Amy, thank you so much for being willing to share your story. Take it away.
All right, so 8 years ago, I made a call to the Arizona Republic newspaper to start up a home delivery subscription. And I only wanted the newspaper for the Sunday coupons, but the nice sales lady I had on the phone was telling me about this deal where I could take the Wednesday paper for a fraction of the cost. And so I wanted her to get the sale. So I said, okay, but I had no intention of ever reading that Wednesday newspaper. I was at a season in my life when I was raising 4 kids in elementary school, and my husband traveled a lot for his job. So I had very little space to leisurely read in my life. But little did I know, it was that Wednesday newspaper that would change my life. So each week I found myself being drawn to this section in the newspaper called the Wednesday's Child. The Wednesday's Child is profiles of children in Arizona who are up for adoption and seeking a family through being in foster care at no fault of their own. And I was intrigued. Growing up in Indiana, I didn't know any kids in foster care, and I didn't know any families who took them in either. So week by week, I was just drawn to these weekly profiles, and I just had to read them every week. But then one Wednesday, I was reading a little girl's profile, and the Lord impressed on my heart that why did I continue to read these stories about these hurting children and yet choose to do nothing about it? And he was so right. How could I read these stories, feel the pain, but choose to just go about my blessed existence, shutting the newspaper week after week? And so after the Lord put that on my heart, I grabbed my husband and I said, come with me, let's go down to ASK, which is Aid to Adoption of Special Kids, who's the agency behind Wednesday's Child. And I said, let's go down to the introductory meeting and find out more about this whole foster care thing. And so we went to the introductory meeting, and we decided after that, yes, we would see about getting licensed to become a foster family. And I don't know if you know, but there's a lot that becoming a foster family entails. There's tons of paperwork and classes to take and interviews and inspections of your home. And so it's a long, tedious process. But we got through it, and we were licensed back in 2012, and we were ready to open up our home and our hearts to a child in need. And so one Tuesday night, I got the call that I needed to come pick up a little boy from the DCS office downtown. And so I raced right down there and picked up a little 6-year-old boy, Matthew. And we got him home and got him settled in, and all was good for a few weeks until nothing was good again. Little 6-year-old Matthew started defying everything that we asked of him and needed from him. In the mornings, instead of getting up and getting ready for school, he would race through our house, tear out the back door, and jump into the swimming pool in his pajamas, taunting us until we basically drug him out. He started throwing all of the food that I made for him for meals. He would put on his dirty shoes and run across our expensive sectional couch, all while calling me a bitch in the process. And he began pulling scissors on my biological children, threatening them whenever he could. He would also take off racing through our neighborhood, where I'd have to call the police time and time again to come help me bring him home. So foster care was becoming very challenging very quickly. We were relying on many prayers and professionals to help us get through each day. But the stress of this child living in our home was beginning to take a toll even on my marriage. And I was afraid if little Matthew didn't leave soon, that my husband was going to be the one to walk out the door. But the problem was there was nowhere for little Matthew to go. He couldn't go to another foster home with the behaviors he was exhibiting in our house. There were no beds open in shelters. There were no beds in group homes. So we were sort of stuck in this chaos until one day I was on the phone with a lady at DCS, and she told me that we could take him to St. Luke's Mental Hospital and check him in and leave him there. What? I didn't know much about this whole foster care thing, and I certainly didn't know anything about mental hospitals, but take a 6-year-old and leave him there? But that's exactly what we did in our desperation with our first foster placement. We drove him to St. Luke's Hospital downtown, mental hospital, checked him in, and left him there, feeling like a complete and utter failure. Obviously, the Lord had not called us to foster care, right? Because I must have heard wrong. Because if he had, it would never have turned out like this, right? And the nurses at that hospital were amazing. They poured into me, telling me that it wasn't my fault and that I'd done my best and I shouldn't take on the guilt and the shame and the regret. But I couldn't help it. I did. I felt like a failure. It's something I was so excited about and something that I thought we had been called to do. And so my husband and I left our first foster placement at that mental hospital, went home, and regrouped. So our family closed our foster care license, but then the Lord still tugged at my heart to help children in foster care. And so we decided to change our license to respite care. And I don't know if you know anything about respite care, but it's like babysitting, or helping out other foster families when they need to take a vacation or they need a break. So we would take kids into our home from like 3 to 10 days to help out foster families. And so those kids that came through our home during that time of respite kind of renewed our souls and got us feeling like maybe we could take in a full-time foster placement and try again. And so we reopened our license and we were debating, should we take in a toddler this time? A boy, a girl, what would be a better fit for our family? When God intervened and I got a call, could we take in an 11-year-old little girl who was living in a group home that needed to come out? Well, not a toddler exactly, but I was already raising 11-year-old triplet sons and a 10-year-old daughter at the time. So what's one more 11-year-old? Bring her in. And so Autumn came and lived in our home as a foster child for a year, and we had a wonderful experience with her. And then she left and went to live with siblings. And we decided, you know what? That was good. Let's go out on a high note, close our license for good. My kids were getting older, which means they were busier. None of them were driving. So I was, constantly busy taking them where they needed to be. And I just thought, I don't have any more space in my life right now to bring in foster kids. So we closed our license, but yet I still couldn't stay away. So I decided to start mentoring. So I started mentoring a 13-year-old girl who was living in a group home. And I would go and pick her up and take her to do things and build relationship with her. And then one day I took her to an event. It's called Children's Heart Gallery here in Arizona. And it's where kids who were in foster care and up for adoption, they come and they get their professional photos taken. They, get their makeup and hair done, and they get these wonderful profiles written up about them, all to go online in the hopes that a family will find them and want to adopt them. And so I'm sitting in the big room with Jenna, and we're playing a game, and in walks a little boy with his caseworker, and I barely noticed. The room is full of kids and caseworkers. And so he begins to walk by the table we're sitting at, And Jenna jumps up and she's all excited and gives him a big hug. And she tells me that they lived together in a shelter for 2 years together. And as she introduced me to this little boy, the Lord put on my heart right then and there that this sweet-spirited little boy was to be my son, that we were to be his family, and we were to take him in and care for him. And I couldn't believe it. Adopt? Like, we had never wanted to adopt. I was trying to do easy. Remember, I was mentoring because I wanted to help out there and not bring it into my home and my life every minute of every day. And so I could not believe this new call on my life to adopt this little boy. And so I went home and talked to my family, and I was telling them, you're not going to believe what happened, and showed them the pictures of the little boy. And they were all over me. They were like, no way, we don't need to adopt. We don't need another child. We don't need this and we don't need that. And the excuses in my family were flying as to why we should not and could not do this. But one thing I know for sure is that our excuses will stop us from doing hard but really important things. So I told them not to worry, that I knew that God was in control, and if this was meant to be for our family, then it would be. And if it wasn't, it would play out, and that we needn't worry. And so I really wasn't worried at all. And Phoenix started coming over to our home. He would come over and play, and then he started spending nights with us. And then we reopened our license again, and he eventually moved in with us, and we officially adopted him on November 19th, 2016, which is National Adoption Day. So we are going on 4 years now with him as a part of our family. And I have to tell you, he's absolutely thriving, and so is our family. And it's awesome to watch my teenagers loving on him and fighting with him and, just teasing him and loving on him and just showing him what real family relationships look like. And I'm just so humbled and amazed at this journey we've been on, from feeling like a complete and utter failure at this foster care thing to the Lord calling us to adoption. And so I don't know what's next for us, but I do know that during this pandemic, our family has reopened our foster care and adoption license. And I don't know what that means next for the future of our family, but I do know that we want to be available and ready to help Arizona's most vulnerable children however we can. Thanks.
Amy, thank you so much for your story. It's a really intense story. And I want to acknowledge your grace and your thoughtfulness, because your family's journey is really complex, but at the heart of it is so much generosity. And I know this is a really intense time also for you guys. Amy didn't tell you, but her 3 sons, her triplets, are headed off to college. So she's about to have more change in the Carney family.
And all different states. So
awesome. Well, congratulations to you. And thank you so much for modeling such fundamental and profound generosity.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have our last storyteller now, Sarah Frazier. As I mentioned, she's our colleague from Tennessee, and we are so lucky to have her sharing her story right now about her parents. Sarah, take it away.
Thanks. My mother and my father are quite different from each other. My mother, Margaret, is self-effacing. She doesn't really like the public eye. She's I guess her phrase for living would be, don't know about that. She's cautious. My dad, on the other hand, is kind of an adventurer, open to adventure, anything that might be entertaining. He's up for it. Let's go. That would be his motto. Both of them got together many years ago. They both appreciate music. Music is one of the constant themes through their life. And in fact, on one of their first dates, he wound up playing the piano and she wound up singing until midnight. My dad is an amateur musician. He's loved music since he was a grade school kid. He learned piano from piano teachers, and then when he was in high school, he got interested in the organ, and he learned how to play the church organ, and then eventually he became a theater organist. in the downtown classic movie theater that Knoxville has called the Tennessee Theater. He became the house organist there and played there for many years. He played songs before the movies came on. And his real vocation was in academia. He started out as a professor and rose to dean of the Department of Engineering, and then he rose to be the chancellor of the University of Tennessee here in Knoxville. So he was kind of known as the musical chancellor, or whatever you want to call it. So he has quite well known around town. But I know him as this adventurous guy. I'll give you an example. One time when I was about 14 years old, I was learning to play the drums in the school band, and he thought, well, I'm going to take you to a faculty concert, a percussion concert over on the campus. So we went, and then after the concert, we heard that there was this streaking event going on. Streaking was a fad back then, and we had heard that there was a big gathering of people and in the middle of the campus, and there were naked people running around. And so my dad turned to me and said, you want to watch? Let's go. So we did. And I saw that age 14, I saw naked woman riding on the back of a motorcycle driven by a naked man. And I saw naked people standing up on top of a diner. I never will forget. There was one man who was waving his privates, and that's a visual that I'll never forget. I was 14. Anyway, I would imagine that my dad was a little bit tempted to join him, but no, he probably realized he had his teenage daughter with him. So we just went home and we told my mom about it, and she said, I'm glad I wasn't there. Then there was another time when my sisters and I were riding in the back of our VW Bug, and my dad was driving, and there was a speed bump up ahead, and we said, go fast, Daddy, go fast. And ordinary parent would say, that's a speed bump, I can't go fast. But my dad, he gunned it. And the Volkswagen immediately conked out and had to be towed away. Then there was the time that my dad participated in a campus war protest with some other faculty members, but they were really there in support of the students. And my dad wore this big old wide peace necktie with peace symbols all over. And then I remember one time when he and I rode a ride at the fair, which was one of those little teacup things, and you sit in it and there's a wheel in the middle, and you spin the wheel and you spin around faster and faster. And I remember there was this maniacal look on my dad's face as he spun us faster and faster. And I remember this might have been my mom's voice in my head going, I don't know if I might have made a mistake getting in this ride with this guy. But anyway, probably the wildest thing that he's done was at his theater organ job, they would show the Rocky Horror Picture Show every year at Halloween. And one year he got it in his head that he was going to dress in drag and dress like Dr. Frankenfurter, who's the main character in the movie. And so he got some lady friends to help him. He put on a wig and jewelry and a bodice and fishnet hose and pumps and makeup and the whole works, and came up from below the stage playing that organ, dressed in drag. And I remember my mom's voice again, I don't know about this. He's the retired chancellor of the University of Tennessee, and he may humiliate himself completely. I can see it being written up in the newspaper and being the laughing stock of Knoxville. But in fact, it was a huge hit. And he did that get up routine for many years afterward. This was when he was in his 70s and on into his 80s. And he would dress as Dr. Frankenfurter every year for the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I had a lot of my friends would say, your dad is fun. I wish I had a fun dad like that. I mean, kids who have strict dads or mean dads. And I really kind of took it for granted, I guess, how special my dad is. But now that he's retired and he's 88, he lives a very quiet life. He has retired completely from music playing and pretty much retired from public life altogether. He sits in his lazy boy, and mom has one too, and they enjoy watching television a lot of the time at home and just stay quiet. My dad had something wrong with his hand. It was like an arthritic condition that forced him to stop playing. So now he doesn't play the organ, and he doesn't play our piano very much at all either. I guess it's kind of difficult for him to be his authentic self now, but they still enjoy the music. They still watch. There's a channel on TV where you can watch different styles of music. You can choose theater songs. You can choose movie themes. You can choose jazz or blues or classical, and they listen to a lot of the music. And my mom likes to say, Dad knows all the tunes and she knows all the words. And they've been together 64 years now. I guess my story is a way of saying, you know, when they ask for people to maybe tell a story, my first reaction was, no way, I don't know about that. And then I thought, you know what? Why not? Let's go. So here I am on the internet, kind of doing the most dad thing I've ever done.
Sarah, thank you for closing our show so beautifully. I so appreciate your story and certainly introducing us to your incredible parents.
They are.
I mean, first of all, laughingstock of Knoxville is a really fun sentence to say out loud. And I
was really afraid of that, yeah.
No, but what an example your dad has set for us. I'm like so inspired. You know, I have a dad that like always seems like the serious guy, but as his kids, we always know that like he's actually like a ton of fun. And but he had a mustache for most of my childhood, so I think people thought he was really serious because you couldn't see that he was like smiling under the Magnum PI mustache. Awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much for your story, and certainly hello to Mr. and Mrs. Frazier. Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a joy to bring you these stories tonight. I'd like to bring up all of our storytellers so that you can give them tiny internet claps. Sarah, Kathy, Evan, Amy, thank you guys so much for being Marella. Here you are. I was like, where's Marella? Marella, thank you so much all for volunteering to share your stories and your heart and to work on your stories and tell them to America tonight. Thanks, guys. To everyone watching, we hope that you are able to stay safe and join us again, like, you know, generally, just like stay safe. I know it's weird and, you know, coronavirus is a thing that's happening differently all across America, but we're trying to respond and show up for all of you equally with these beautiful stories from everyday Americans. So join us on our next show. We'll be here the week after next with more true first-person stories from across the country. It has been an honor to share this time with you. Have a good night.